past the windows and toward the front door. With the curtains drawn, I couldn't make out anything but a big shadow. Then, it knocked on the door. It was a gentle knock. A man's voice called out softly, "Hello?" I just listened intently and tried to keep silent. Eventually he knocked again and said,
"Hello? I need to speak with you."
He was speaking through clenched teeth. He was either extremely cold or extremely angry. I very carefully stepped back into the bedroom to grab the gun, but the place is so old, the doors creak. I barely tapped the bedroom door as I passed it, and it squealed like a dying pig. Then the man outside said, just above a whisper, "I know you're there." For just a moment, in my lethargy, I considered the possibility that this was one of the ranger's friends, or maybe somebody else who lived on the mountain. I was never going to open the door, but stupidly, I figured talking to it couldn't hurt. I say it because I immediately stopped believing that there was a human being on the other side of the door the moment I opened my mouth. I said, "Who the fuck is it?" as assertively as I could. The second I stopped talking, whoever it was out there repeated my question while mimicking my voice accurately. It almost sounded like an echo. Then he said,
"May I come in, please?"
His voice was a little shaky, but it definitely sounded like me, unnervingly similar to me. But he was still clenching his teeth, so I could hear the difference. I pointed the gun at the door. It was dark in the house, so he couldn't see what I was doing through the curtain, and said, "If you don't get the fuck out of here right now, I'll blow you in half." For those of you who don't know what a 357 can do to a person, a slug to the chest essentially makes you into a human milkshake. And that's after passing through 2 inches of oak door. We both just stood there for a dreadfully long minute. It started testing out my voice, groaning and whispering and muttering. It said a lot of things, but I only remember a few of them.
"What's your name? What's your name? A little cabin for the weekend, for the weekend, for..."
And then a bunch of lip smacking and chewing noises.
They're lying. The ones out there. La 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 la. You aren't alone in there. I'm not alone out here. What's your name? You go up in the trees or down in the hole. That's where you go. Or they'll find you either way.
The sound of my voice making these horrific noises and phrases set every inch of my skin on fire. I can hardly describe the physical sensation of fright this intense. It was almost like having a bad fever, hot and cold and wet and sticky all at the same time. I shouted for it to leave and said I was armed. I considered firing off a round, but that's a decision you can't take back, and my number one rule is to only fire when I'm certain I've got a target and clear reason. I am proud to say that I can use my voice a lot better than whatever it was that mimicked me. I'm a soft-spoken guy, but I came down like a fucking hurricane, screaming, "I will fucking kill you!" He replied simply in a softer tone of my own voice,
"I will fucking kill you."
Then it went back to babbling gibberish and knocking politely on the door over and over and over again. After another minute or two, it suddenly stopped. The last thing it said was,
"I know where she is."
Then it kicked the door, and I mean harder than any human could possibly kick a door, and ran off. The boom was so loud I couldn't believe the door didn't implode in its frame. The person or thing bounded down the wooden patio and off into the snow, and I swear on my life and honor, it sounded like a horse or some other huge 4-legged animal charging off into the woods. A child's laughter rang out, and then everything was silent. Needless to say, I remained in a cat-like state of delirious paranoia for the rest of the night. The storm picked back up, and I did not hear anything else. I spent the whole night debating whether the thing at the door was talking about Faye. I tried to convince myself that it was just yammering more nonsense like all the voices I've heard up here before. But the way it spoke that sentence haunts me even now as I share this. Its voice, my voice, was purposeful and restrained. It chose the words carefully, and it knew exactly what to say. I've been thinking a lot about what Redditors have been saying about Faye being some kind of doppelganger. When I first saw the nude woman on my car, I thought it was a trick to lure me into the woods where the voices lie. I thought that the real Faye stopped me from leaving the cabin, but many of you have pointed out that the reverse could be entirely possible, given how the Faye I took home to California is behaving, given how she has failed all of my tests, and given how her engagement ring has been missing since we got home. So I sat there for hours, considering whether I should go out into the woods during broad daylight to search for my fiancée. Of course, it is a stupid idea, but now I understand why people in horror movies do idiotic things. If I'm not looking for her or for answers, why am I here? I need to know what I saw that day in the driveway. I need to know if there are many voices or just one, and I need to know how to get all this back to normal. I listened to music on my iPod and desperately tried to distract myself by reading news articles online until daybreak. Most of them wouldn't load because the gods of internet have cursed this cabin. Around 4 a.m, I got up to get some food from the kitchen, and I opened the window curtain just a tiny bit to see if anything was going on outside. A ton of snow had fallen. At the rim of the forest, dozens of yards out, I could see a distant figure standing perfectly still in the moonlight. He was facing away, staring off into the darkness of the woods. I checked on him every 20 minutes since then. He never moved. When the sun rose around 6:15 a.m, he was gone. I never saw his face. Today the ranger and his two buddies came to the cabin as promised. They were instantly likable and warm. One of them, Taiwi, is a medicine man in his 50s and was especially cool. The other was his son, Nathan, who was probably just a few years older than me. They told me all kinds of interesting lore about Pikes Peak and the surrounding areas, and then proceeded to tell me a disturbing story that they believe explains the strange activity on the mountain. For the sake of brevity, I will relay this in my next post. The ranger gave me one of his facility satellite phones to stay in contact with him in case of emergencies. I used it to call Faye, but she didn't answer, so I called Jason and Richard, who are presently caring for her. Apparently Faye had become inexplicably outraged after taking a shower, threw an enormous tantrum, and locked herself in our bedroom. She refused to eat for the rest of the night. Allison and Jason slept in the guest room, and Richard, he slept on our couch downstairs and worked late on his commissions. He's a digital artist. He told me that around 1 a.m, the same time I had my visitor, Faye ran downstairs into the kitchen, eyes closed, and started drinking out of the sink faucet. Then she turned around and stared, eyes still shut, at Richard while he sat at the breakfast table. She said, "Felix?" To which he replied, "He's in Colorado, Faye, remember?" And then she said, "We sent him there to die." Then she sat down right there on the kitchen tiles and went back to sleep. I've instructed my friends only to wake Faye if she does anything serious, so they observed my rules and got her back into bed without much of an issue. For all the crazy shit Faye does when she's asleep, at least she never gets violent. The guys put her back into bed easily enough. The next day, Allison bailed on the whole project. She said she was awake all night listening to Faye whispering through the wall. Faye told Allison about how there was a man in the house, and he was asking about her. My flight home is the day after tomorrow, so I'm going to have to figure out all this shit really quick. I'm going to go and take a nap. It's nice and bright outside, and there's no voices. Good night. P.S. As soon as I get home, I'll put up the Faye video. I know I keep saying this, but I really did not expect to suddenly return to Colorado. I swear I will put it up, and then that will be the end of it. I resent myself for turning this into such a long and ridiculous blog of my experiences. Taiwi is an incredible storyteller. He told me that Pikes Peak and the surrounding area was inhabited by the Ute, Minotao, Arapaho, Pueblo, Anasazi, and other Native American groups at various times. In the 1860s, when the gold rush was in full swing, many Indians were violently displaced because of the mining operations there. They were torn away from their sacred lands, which was catastrophic to their cultures. Taiwi stressed that historically, Americans have not understood the significance of land and names to Native Americans, and this is critical to understanding the supernatural presence on the mountain. The major world religions like Christianity and Hinduism and Islam are universal. They can be practiced anywhere. You can pick up your whole life and move to Kentucky or Scotland or Istanbul, and you'll still be whatever religion you are. Your God still hears your prayers. He still intervenes in your life. But Native Americans practice land-based religions. The land they inhabit is part of their creation stories. It's not that the land belongs to them, it's that they belong to the land, and both are in a symbiotic relationship with one another. History is embedded in the landscape. A person is reminded of specific lessons and wisdom when they see a part of the land. The mouth of this river has a story attached to it. The fallen tree has a story attached to it. A battle was won here, a chief died there. Peace was made between tribes with a feast here. When a native group is forced out of its homeland, the people lose their history. What's worse, they leave behind the places where their dead are buried. Since the dead are bound to that place, the Indians who left no longer have spiritual connections to their ancestors, and thus to their gods. Their medicines and magic no longer work. They forget the names of sacred places. As the names and history and wisdom are forgotten, the tribe's spiritual power evaporates. Taiwi said that when Pikes Peak was taken, a group of disgruntled Utes descended on the miners and slaughtered a bunch of them. Because a complex network of alliances and peace treaties, these Utes were punished by another tribe. They dug holes in the ground and slit the Utes' throats. Then they buried them upside down in the holes with their legs sticking out of the ground so that wolves would feast on their calves. That was supposed to be the end of it, but then something else happened. The legend says that these dead Utes arose from the tainted ground one night. Because their flesh had been flayed from the hips down, they looked like walking skeletons. They hobbled into the Arapaho camps and took women and children back up the mountain. They forced them deep into one of the mines, never to leave again. The howls of women and children have been reported on the mountain for over 100 years now. The Utes and Arapaho engaged in blood feuds, sometimes called mourning wars, for years over this. They exchanged curses, executed and skinned and tortured each other. They stained the once-scarred earth on Pikes Peak with rivers of blood. I just kind of sat there with the ranger while Taiwi and Nathan blessed the cabin. They burned sage and tobacco inside and outside and used crushed herbs to dust cover their hands. They made a handprint on every window and drew small symbols in ash at the top of the front door, inside and outside. They gave me bundled sage, cedar, hawthorn and told me to burn it if anyone tried to get inside. It drives bad spirits insane. Then they provided me with small pouches filled with herbs and blessed objects to wear around my neck and in my pockets whenever I went outside. Nathan gave me a totem that he wears around his neck and told me to give it to Faye. Then they sang a really incredible chant in their language. It lasted about 15 minutes. I was blown away. I fucking love these guys. Then we went outside. I showed them the Dreamcatcher, and they told me that they had never seen anything like it. The Dreamcatcher is made with 3 branches woven together with hair, and it has old yarn or wool string with glass beads crisscrossing the center in a pattern. It is old and handmade. Taiwi told me not to touch it or move it. If you find an object of power and do not know who made it or what it protects, you should leave it alone. I asked him if it could be evil, and he said maybe. I got them up to speed on everything that has happened. I said that a lot of my friends, Redditors, but I didn't explain that, suspected that Faye at my house in California was a duplicate, and that the real Faye was somewhere in the woods. Taiwi and Nathan disagreed with each other on whether that could be, but we searched the woods looking for signs of my Faye. I told them about the missing ring, and they said exactly what many Redditors have said. If Faye loved the ring and it was powerfully symbolic to her, it could be used by a bad spirit to harm her. They told me to find it at all costs. They also told me that if Faye indeed were still here on the mountain, she was certainly dead. Taiwi named the creature that was tormenting us. He said his people called it At'an A Anatakua, or the Imposter. Bad spirits inhabit the land everywhere, and sometimes they get the opportunity to use a tragedy like the Pikes Peak massacres to commandeer a human figure and walk the earth partly mortal. In the case of the Imposter, they collect animal and human parts piecemeal wherever they can and stitch them together. This is why they walk strangely, vocalize strangely, and why they never show their faces or come out during the day. They cannot pass for humans. I asked Taiwi why I always see someone facing away from me at the edge of the forest, and he said that it's because it does not want me to know its identity. But eventually, the Imposter would come for me, wearing Faye's skin and teeth and hair, and try to convince me that it was her. When I asked him what it wanted, he said, "Nobody knows." He also told me that there is power in names, as many Redditors have stated, and that I should not speak its name, especially not to it, because that could provoke it. Of the voices I was hearing in the forest every night, Taiwi said, "They practice what they hear for decades. It makes it easier for them to hunt." Taiwi, Nathan, and the ranger left at sunset, and I spent the rest of the evening thinking about all of this. And I think I figured a lot of things out. Around 9 p.m, something disturbing happened. I used the satellite phone the ranger gave me to call Faye. She actually answered and was just lying in bed reading. We had a great conversation. I told her that I missed her so much and that I was up here trying to solve what was happening. I told her I wanted to have a family with her. She said that she was feeling better and had actually gone a whole night without sleepwalking or terrifying Jason and Richard, my buddies who are looking after her while I'm here in Colorado. After about 15 minutes of talking, I started hearing sounds outside. I heard footsteps crunching in the dry snow, and I heard a voice, my voice. It said things like flight, insomnia, miss you, see you soon. The thing had been standing near the window, mimicking my conversation with Faye. I told Faye I'll call her back later, and hung up the phone, then went silent. The thing walked around the cabin slowly, trying to figure out if I had moved, and kept mumbling and repeating a few phrases as it went. Finally, it came and knocked on the door. Its knock was gentle, just like last night. I was a little bit less scared because of all the blessings Taiwi had put on the cabin, but I still held onto the gun just in case any shit went down. He spoke to me in my own voice, and the first thing he said was,
"The hole will fill with snow and blood."
So yeah, that amped up my fear quite a bit. Every hair on the back of my neck bristled. Do you know the feeling of being so scared that your vision turns hyperreal? Everything looks like a realistic video game, so everything looks just slightly off. Then it knocked again and said,
"Hello? May I come in?"
I simply said, "No, leave." Then it knocked for another 30 seconds or so and said,
"What is your name? Hello?"
I lied and said, "My name is Daniel, now leave, you can't come in." The thing started knocking harder, a lot harder, non-stop, and said,
"What is your name? What is your name?"
It was terrifying to hear my voice coming from the other side of the door and to hear rage building in that voice. I said again, "My name is Daniel," but the thing just kept yammering and asking the same question. It would occasionally say things like, "Ticket, ticket, rental car. The hole, down in the hole. What is your name? May I know your name?" Then I had an idea. I'm really good with fake accents, and when I was a child, my first language was German. Dad immigrated to Boston and met my mum there. I started speaking in a thick accent, talking about my day, and then started shouting in German. I recited a poem I know by Hermann Hesse, Die Frauen von Ravina tragen. My visitor went silent and stopped knocking. I could tell it was just listening. So then I started shouting in a British accent, reciting lines from V from Vendetta, my favorite film of all time. I shouted thank you in every single language I know. My unwanted guest just sort of stammered a little bit, trying to mimic me, but failed to do so. I was no longer speaking in any recognizable pattern or tone. Eventually, it just started growling the sounds Faye and I heard in the forest when we first stayed at the cabin. The wol my, and started scratching and pounding on the door. I grabbed the sage bundle and torched it with my lighter, then waved it all around the doorframe. I don't know if the thing outside could smell it, but it walked off the porch all pissed off, growling, and went off into the night. This time, I ran to the window and tried to get a glimpse of it, but all I could see was a very dark, amorphous form disappearing into the trees. I think I've figured a lot of stuff out. I think this entity is mimicking me because it's going to try and convince Faye that it is me. It is rehearsing my voice and then whispering to Faye while she sleeps, talking to her in her dreams, trying to get her to let it inside of our house. I think it wants to convince her that I am the imposter, not it. I think I also figured out why the voices go crazy at night and why they're getting closer to the home. These fuckers aren't trying to scare me, they're trying to deprive me of sleep. If I'm psychologically and emotionally drained, I'm weaker. If I'm delirious, I'll make a mistake. Their, or his, attempts to get me will be easier. I'm still trying to figure out how controlling Faye like a puppet in her sleep plays into all this. I know what I saw. There was a man standing outside our house, walking the exact same creepy way Faye was sleepwalking at the exact same time. I'm also still considering the possibility that I already made a terrible mistake and that the imposter has already won. When I went outside on the first night at the cabin with Faye, trying to see where the voices were coming from, I left the door unlocked. A Redditor said that was the moment that Faye was replaced by something else. I just don't know what to think, but for now, I'm going the fuck to sleep. Update, 30th of April. Well, I found the ring. Number 5. I live in a small town built in bushland where a lot of elderly people reside. So it's safe to say that it's always been a safe neighborhood, and I've never needed to be overly cautious. This is probably why I had often been naive enough to believe that although there is a small possibility of something bad happening to me, I thought it was far too unlikely. At the time, I was 15 years old, and I used to go out on weekends to visit my boyfriend at the time, who lived quite a while away from me. I wasn't able to drive at this age, so public transport was my only means of going over to visit him. This meant walking about 20 minutes from my house to a bus stop, catching the bus into the city, and then catching a train to his house. I used to do the same trip every week, and I felt safe taking the trip by myself. As I was only able to see him once during the week, I would leave early in the morning and get there and stay until fairly late before going home. Because it was late by the time I left my boyfriend's house, and public transport was less frequent at that hour, it would be a waste of time for my boyfriend to travel any of the way back home with me. So every week, I made the trip back home alone. On one particular night, after visiting my boyfriend, it was a usual ride on the train back into the city, and I was waiting at the bus station. The bus station is a large, open building above a number of platforms on a lower story where the buses would pull in. I was waiting on the upper story on a bench in front of the stairs that led to the platform I needed for my bus home. I don't recall there being many people around, maybe 1 or 2 people passing by, but it was essentially deserted because of the late hour. Also, on a side note, because I was visiting my boyfriend, I dressed up to look pretty for him. I was wearing a decent casual dress. I had straightened my long hair so it looked neat, and I had just recently received some high platform boots for my birthday, which I thought looked super cool, and they were fun to wear because I didn't feel so short. I was ruffling through my bag for some gum, and I noticed someone sit down on the bench next to me. Usually, when someone sits on a bench which is already occupied, they leave a sort of one-person gap between. But this person sat down right beside me, despite there being a whole bench available. When I looked up from my bag, I saw a man who was maybe 30 years old. I'm a terrible judge of age, so I'm not really sure. I don't remember too much about his appearance. I think he was bald, or had short hair. Being naive, I didn't think to try to remember any details about his appearance, which I would have done had this happened to me now. When our eyes met, he asked me something along the lines of, "Have you got any weed?" At 15, I was a good kid and didn't have anything to do with smoking or alcohol, and certainly not hard drugs. I told him no and continued to sit uncomfortable on the bench waiting for the bus. Then he gestured up towards the bus schedule above the stairs to the platform and asked me,
"Where are you heading?"
As if him asking me about the drugs wasn't warning sign enough for me to not tell him where I was going. I obediently told him that I was catching the 123 bus to XYZ. Coincidentally, he responded with,
"Oh, me too."
I found this a bit unlikely since it was a small town where the bus was headed, but it was still possible that he was actually headed this way. I started to get suspicious at this point, and I was already feeling very uncomfortable. I looked down at my phone in hopes that he wouldn't talk to me anymore. He noticed this and asked me what phone service I was with. I told him the service, and he said,
"I've got a voucher for phone credit for that service, but I can't use it because I'm with a different service. Did you want it?"
I politely declined, assuming he had ill intentions, but unsure what benefit he would gain from giving me this voucher. In hindsight, maybe he was trying to get my phone number or something. I honestly don't know. He persisted.
"Are you sure? Why not? I can't use it."
But I declined again. No thank you. Things got weirder after that, when he pointed out my big platform shoes and asked,
"Is it difficult to run in those shoes?"
Creepy. I lied and said, "No, I can run very well in these." He then gestured to the stairs down to the bus platform and suggested that we both go down there to wait for the bus. The platform is very poorly lit, and there was probably no one down there. I did not want to be there alone with this person, so I told him that I was going to wait here, but that he could wait down there if he wanted to. As expected though, he didn't move and remained on the bench with me. A few moments later, I noticed someone walking towards us through the bus station. Against all possible odds, it happened to be someone that I recognized. It was my friend's older brother. He was probably about 17 at the time. "Ben!" I almost shouted when I saw him. He made his way over and stood in front of me on the bench. I asked him which bus he was catching, and luckily it was the same one as me. I was so relieved. We exchanged a few words back and forth, and eventually the creepy guy sitting next to me got up and wandered off. He hadn't said anything while Ben and I were talking. Ben and I went down to the platform and got on the bus when it arrived, and surprisingly, the creepy guy didn't get on the bus like he said he was going to. I told Ben about what had happened and how he had saved me. I can't imagine what would have unfolded if Ben had not showed up when he did. I would have gone down to the platform when the bus arrived, and hopefully he would have not done anything since there was someone driving the bus. If he had gotten as far as getting on the bus with me, I was worried about the 20-minute walk from my bus stop to my house. We are on a dark street surrounded by bush on one side, and I didn't have credit on my phone to call my mum and ask for a lift.
Number 4.
I used to live in a market town in the United Kingdom, and like every town, we had our town mascot. You know that one person everybody knows about? That crazy lady that does loads of meth, or the creepy drunk that shouts at strangers? Yes, that type of mascot. The guy everyone knew in my place was called Johan, sometimes referred to as Johan the Guitar Man by the locals. He was an average-sized guy with a dark beard and a happy demeanor, and he was very religious, a born-again Christian. He would often be found on the street corners talking in tongues while strumming his guitar. He could also be spotted singing one of his songs while giving his posters, every word of which was in rainbow font, to passerby or waving at school children. That, and he'd have maracas he would shake at random intervals. I guess you could say he was some sort of pseudo-street preacher or something. To most, he was harmless, though there were a lot of stories floating around about Johan, and at school there would be frequent stranger danger warnings about him. One such story was that he was in a car crash and had severe brain damage. Another was that he was initially going to study science at the University of Cambridge, but had a religious experience and gave it all up. But by far, the worst rumor we heard was that he'd raped some young girl, but was so overwhelmed with guilt by the act that he lost his mind and decided to convert. There were also weird things that Johan actually did do. It was his birthday sometime in July, and he was giving out invitations in the street to a party he was going to have. I'm afraid I didn't go myself, though I'm curious if people actually did. His apartment, a place above a shop adorned with the words "Jesus loves you" painted across the outside wall, it was tiny, and he invited a lot of people. The overall local attitude towards Johan was that even though he was nuts, he was more or less harmless. Over the years, I collected numerous amounts of his posters, and he'd pop in occasionally to where I worked and we'd chat. I even got one of his CDs off of him. I probably still have it somewhere. Even teachers I knew would put up his posters in their classrooms. I vividly remember my English teacher displaying rainbow-coloured size 36 words stating, "You are all wonderfully loved," obviously gifted from Johan. Anyway, back to me. I had many experiences with Johan over the years, and most of them were pleasant, generally just saying "Hi Johan" as I passed on my way to work and school and whatnot. To be honest, I did get funny vibes off of him, but I decided to ignore them. He actually lived on the same street as me, so we were neighbours and I was eventually used to his constant appearances. One particular day, however, he greeted me by my name. I had never told him my name though.
Good morning, my dear sister Emma.
I wasn't all surprised by this. He knew the names of a few of my friends, so perhaps they told him my name at some point. I greeted him in return and told him I was doing fine. I didn't want to talk for too long as I had to get to my friend's house, so I tried to keep it short. We talked about something menial, probably the weather. I made my excuse to leave and he ended the conversation with,
May Jesus shower his ever-flowing love on you. Would you like me to bless you today, Sister Emma?
I thought this was sweet, so I hesitantly agreed. And hey, it would be a funny story to tell my friend, right? Plus, this probably wouldn't take too long anyway. Johan proceeded to put down his guitar and then roughly grabbed me by my hand, chanting hoarsely in tongues. It hurt. He had scraped my wrist in the process, and it was then I noticed he had grossly long nails. It would be an understatement to say I was a little freaked. The chanting got more intense, and then he suddenly reverted to English.
May the love of heaven flow over Emma, her descendants, and all those that care for her. May she find a loving husband to provide for her. May her demons be driven from her soul. Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you. Bless her. Bless her. Bless her.
During all the Jesus loves you and bless her parts, he was leaping up and down enthusiastically while holding my hand tightly, scratching me further. He was excited, laughing manically. He then ended the blessing, if you could call it that, with some vicious, high-pitched mouth trumpeting, like he was impersonating a kazoo or something. If it wasn't totally terrifying, I would have laughed. He eventually let go of my hand. I shakily thanked him and walked away as quickly as possible. Of course, after all of that, I made my way to my friend's place and we laughed about it. Although I showed her my hand or wrist and she was just as freaked out as I was. But I didn't rule it as intentional harm and we both forgot about it and did whatever we were going to do that day. Eventually, I left town and went to university, forgetting all about Johan. But then, through a pal on Facebook, a link to the local news was posted. Johan had been arrested and was to face trials for stalking and sending threatening messages to a girl around my age. It appeared that he was angry at the girl for not responding to his advances after he wanted to be more than just friends with her. And the messages became creepily sexual, asking the girl if she wanted a taste of his chocolate cake. He believed that the girl was his wife and believed that their love was a sign from God, and they were apparently destined to be together. He eventually ended up threatening to kill the girl, her boyfriend, and their families for crimes of adultery. It turns out he was friends with a lot of local gang members, and he was considering sending them to the home of the girl and her boyfriend. The chilling words on one of his final letters to her said,
God unfortunately says that unless you give up your ways, he will have to execute you. You've seen all the thunder and lightning. Take that as a sign. It would take just one lightning bolt to finish you off, my lovely.
What makes it even worse is that the girl used to go to my school, and although it wasn't at the same time as me, I used to work at the same place as her. In that regard, I questioned the motive behind all of the friendly chats Johan would have with me, and whether he did mean harm behind all the oddly rough hand-grabbing. For the most part though, I believe that he was a man that needed help, but he was largely ignored due to being harmless. It's a shame myself and my old hometown, including that poor girl, had to find out the hard way. He eventually got detained under the Mental Health Act, and I have to say that I'm relieved for him.
Number 3.
I'll try to keep this as brief and detailed as possible. However, my story becomes quite hard to explain without giving any context. I'm a 17-year-old boy now and have been interested in mountaineering and the wilderness ever since I was a young lad. This story takes place in the summer of 2011 when I was about 11 years old. My family and I, being the adventurous type, decided to climb Mount Rinjani in Indonesia, a huge volcano which is rich in wildlife and forestry. It wasn't strange for my family to go off on these amazing adventures, as we were the types who loved exploring. My family consisted of, all told, about 25 people. The beginning of this encounter starts on the third and final day of our descent down the volcano. After about 7 hours of walking, my uncle, 2 of my cousins, and I had finally got to the bottom. I should have mentioned this earlier, but when we hiked, we all went off in our little pods. My uncle and 2 cousins and I at the front, my 2 sisters, aunt, male cousin, and mother second, etc. These pods were set about 500 meters apart, and although this is a significant distance, we were 100% certain that no one was between our walking pods, as we all set off at the same time and there is only one way down the summit. But this is where it gets creepy. We were waiting at the bottom for the second pod of family to arrive when, after about 10 minutes of waiting patiently, we heard a loud screaming coming from the direction of the path. We then see my cousin, Seb, and my sister Sarah come sprinting down the volcano, fear in their eyes and a shortness of breath to their speech. The following is their recollection of the events that took place, so forgive me if I'm being a little inaccurate. They were walking on the path, which was eerily surrounded with tree lines on both sides, when all of a sudden they all simultaneously notice a black bin bag directly hanging in the way of the path, disrupting the walking pattern of the group. Growing up in Myanmar and knowing just about everything there is to know about spirituality, my mother and aunt described it as a bag one might fill with chicken heads when performing witchcraft. This was mainly because of the placement of it, as if to entice a weary traveller to touch it and thus allow the hex to attach itself. They shrugged it off as a bag filled with fecal matter or something of the sort and continued the descent. A few hundred meters on, and my sister Anne says to my mum and aunt, "Can you feel that?" Though no other words were exchanged, they both knew what my sister meant. They later described it as an urging worry that someone or something was watching them. The next thing to take place is still hard for my family to talk about. They said that Seb whispered to them, "Guys, be very quiet and turn around." My sister and mum complied, though my aunt refusing, stating that she feared the worst. What they saw next can only be described as something from mythology. They recalled seeing a pitch-black dog-shaped creature emerge from the bushes a good 20 meters behind them. They described it as being huge, not in height but in muscle tone, far too big to be a village dog. They said it was jet black with visibly white teeth, but this is the part that still scares me to this day. They said that despite the distance separating them, it could be seen as having bright yellow eyes. Now, we are the proud owners of a Newfoundland who weighs in at a solid 90 kilos, and for those who haven't seen them before, at times they can be extremely intimidating, so when my mum says that this thing is huge, I take it at face value. They continued to walk with this thing hunting them, to use their phrase, for a good 5 minutes before it seemingly vanished into the shrubs. They took this as their key to sprint for the bottom, which was now in sight. What worried them most, however, wasn't its appearance, but rather what its intentions were, and how long it may have been on the trail for. The final pod of 6 or so made it down the volcano only 5 minutes after the second arrived, stating that they encountered no such creature, and, what is probably more disturbing, no black bin bag. The reason that I find this so mind-boggling is because the first pod, which I was in, saw no black thing, nor any sign of the bin bag in question. Though this might seem meaningless, us being the first ones down the only route to the bottom knew for a fact that no other mountaineers came after us. So for us not to have seen it, it means that it must have been placed after us, and in addition to this, for the final pod not to have seen it, required someone to remove it once pod 2 went past. This means that there was some weirdo up there tying bin bags to vines, and then untying them once again just to fuck with us. There is also no way it could have blown down, as the volcano was practically windless. This brings me to the final question. What was that black dog creature on the mountain? Was it connected to the voodoo bag which was seen on the path? And finally, has anyone else had such an experience with these beasts? For the record, after arriving home, I checked to see if there was any logical explanation for what they saw. There are no recorded wild dogs which inhabit this part of Indonesia. They maintain their story to this day, and even though I'm usually a skeptic, I have no choice but to believe them. I spoke to my cousin Seb about it a couple of weeks ago, and he's a pretty big guy, like 6'2" rugby player, but he said this thing drove fear straight into his heart. He felt like it was pure evil. He felt as though they were being hunted. What chilled me to the bone was when he told me he distinctly remembers whistling before encountering this creature, and, what's even worse, it didn't have a tail. I've been told that these are signs of skinwalkers. Unfortunately, 2 months later, a close family friend who came on the trek was diagnosed with brain cancer. He died last week. My family and I can't help but wonder if that black dog played a part. I know I sound crazy, but with all these things happening and with everything seeming so connected, I don't know what to think anymore.
Number 2.
I graduated high school almost a year ago. I really had no urge to attend college or the military, and basically got stuck in my boring hometown for months, where I slowly became dependent on Xanax and booze, and was destined to repeat the cycle of white trash set before me by my parents and theirs before them. I knew I had to leave town, so I decided to sign up for a website you may have heard of called wwoof.com, Worldwide Opportunities in Organic Farming. You pay a small fee and they make available a directory of organic farming operations that will feed you and allow you to live with them in return for a certain amount of work around the farm. The place I decided to commit to was a Hare Krishna community in the deep south. I got there and my car almost immediately broke down. It was a 30-year-old Chevy Blazer I bought on Craigslist for $500. Later on, I was to find out it was beyond repair at this point. The closest town was almost 20 miles away, so I found myself stranded and surrounded by the most unbearable hipsters. To be more specific, I'd say about a third of the population of the community were either first or second generation Indian immigrants living near the temple for religious reasons. Another demographic was aging hippies, also there for spiritual purposes, but also running the small-scale organic farm located on the property. Everyone else, however, was self-absorbed, condescending, right out of college but vapid as shit hipsters. I basically kept to myself, but occasionally was forced into conversations about vibrating crystals and their 3-year spiritual journey, no doubt being funded by their parents. I had been there for weeks and was desperate for a real conversation, and then Michael showed up. I had heard stories about Michael. A couple of days before I showed up, he had left to retrieve an impounded car in a large city about an hour away. Everyone said he was lazy, insane, and would spend hours up in his room doing yoga instead of coming down and working with the rest of us. He showed up late in the evening, going on about how he was going to really get involved with farming and throw himself into Krishna consciousness. He was in his early 30s. He looked like a balding Hasidic Jew, his unwashed sideburns curled. He spoke like a stoner cartoon character, his sentences punctuated with and, or and like, giving his utterly fried brain time to figure out what others wanted to hear. He reminded me of many of the friends I left back home. We became friends fast, as he was the only person there who didn't give me the urge to bite my fingers off when we spoke. We were both from Texas, so we talked about the loony conservative teachers we had in high school, football, and, of course, drugs. Every now and then, he brought up subjects that really sort of threw me off. He wasn't able to get his car out of the impound garage, so he schemed the best way to break it out. These plans involved firearms, pipe bombs, and telepathy. He told me that he came to the Hare Krishna temple to befriend some of the gurus and learn Reiki meditation, a form of meditation used to control the minds and bodies of other people. He told me that he believed he had used Reiki once to seduce a woman at a party. This is when I understood his reputation. I simply nodded and laughed occasionally when he went off on these rants. I knew one day I would reach a saturation point for this absurdity, but I could probably endure a week more. A couple of days later, we were eating lunch with one of the gurus. I was telling Michael about my trip to the giant field where the Branch Davidian used to be. He wasn't sure what the Branch Davidian was, so I explained to him about Wacko David Koresh and the botched siege by the FBI and ATF that led to the death of 76 Davidians and 4 ATF agents. He was enraged.
The government is always trying to silence people preaching the truth. That's so fucked up.
I wanted to explain to him that David Koresh was a sociopath cult leader, interested in power and nothing else, but he wasn't having it. Now I was angry. He was having a tantrum about a subject I had just explained to him, and now he's telling me I'm wrong and that Koresh was a martyr? This is when I saw the truly insane Michael. He was spitting, red as a beet, pacing back and forth. I left the table and got back to work, but he followed me. After an hour of his absurd argument, I couldn't handle it anymore. I'm not having this conversation with a fucking loon, Michael. How can I expect logic from you? You came here to get superpowers. The look in his eyes changed from anger to hatred. He got real still and went at me. Michael was a big guy and much bigger than me. He lunged at me and I ran. As I ran, I went through my pocket, praying I grabbed my knife before I left my cabin. I know it sounds ridiculous, but you don't walk my old neighborhood without some sort of protection. Plus, it was a pretty useful tool on the farm. Luckily, I had grabbed it, and I turned around so he saw it. He stopped and contemplated for 3 seconds. He quickly turned around and finished his lunch. The next day, I pulled the temple president aside and explained what had happened and that we needed to get rid of him. It didn't take much convincing. No one really cared for him, and he wasn't much help on the farm anyway. I felt bad snitching on the guy. He was in a pretty desperate situation. He had no car, no money, and I can't imagine that he had many friends. The temple president also informed me that he had been an alcoholic for 10 years and had come here to get sober. I found it very strange that he never told me this. Later that day, I saw through my window someone drive up and hand him several suitcases to pack what little he had, and I saw them both drive off to God knows where. Weeks went by and the whole encounter kind of faded from my conscience, but late one night I got a text.
Hey, this is Michael. We can get out our car for $280. Want to go traveling?
I never responded. I wasn't sure how he got my number, but I figured he looked it up on Facebook or something. A few nights later, I was in the temple office using the Wi-Fi to make some emails. I was making the walk back to my cabin, and from the pitch black, I hear a lot of loud banging coming from a barn. I remember thinking that it must have been an animal, but also thinking it must have been a pretty big one to make that much noise. I entered my cabin. The actual door to the cabin doesn't have a lock, but my bedroom did, so I used that one. I was pretty unsettled by the banging, but I figured my imagination was just getting the best of me. Later that night, I woke up needing to take a piss. The cabin didn't have a bathroom, but we had a shared outhouse. I didn't feel like putting on shoes and walked around in the dark, so I figured I'd just piss in the sink. I know, it's gross, but I'm the only one who used that kitchen. I opened my bedroom door, and I nearly pissed myself right there. Michael, completely naked, was crouching in a corner of my kitchen, facing the wall. I made a noise I wasn't aware I could make, something you would only hear Shaggy make on Scooby-Doo or something. This noise alerted Michael to my entrance. All he did was glare at me and shook his whole body. I slammed my door and locked it almost immediately. I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to pacify me with Reiki meditation. I called 911. I didn't open my door or even approach it until I saw the red and blue lights outside my window. Michael wasn't there when I arrived. My guess is that he ran into the woods that surrounded the farm. I explained Michael and I's history and what happened that night. There wasn't much they could do since no one seemed to know anything about Michael. I had to leave the farm shortly after. Calling the police was really frowned upon since I believe many of the old hippies thought that they were still avoiding the draft. Honestly though, I didn't mind leaving. I couldn't sleep knowing Michael might be out there in the woods, angrier than he was before. I stayed up almost 3 days while I waited for my friend to come pick me up.
Number 1.
This happened over a week ago, and I felt like the first bigger shock and paranoia has settled a little, so I wanted to share what happened with me. I will begin my story with a little explanation about how my apartment building is designed, as that information is quite essential to understanding the story. If it matters as well, I'm a female and 21. So I live in a medium-sized town nearby the center area, but still in a somewhat quiet neighborhood. My building basically has elderly people and families living here, so hence the main doors are always locked, so you either need to have a key or have someone buzz you in order to get inside the building. Once you enter the building, there's obviously the staircase. Well, at each mid-floor there are these small balconies. I live on the 3rd floor and you can see directly into my bedroom from the balcony, which is located on the 2nd floor. I want to explain one more thing though before beginning with the juicy stuff. My building is also located behind a big school building, so I usually don't close my curtains as there's nothing but a big empty parking lot in front of it. Now, let's get to the actual experience. It was the night between Wednesday and Thursday, and I didn't have work the next day, so I was just spending some time watching YouTube from my tablet. I hear some noises coming from the hallway, kind of heavy steps and the sound of someone occasionally bumping into the handrail as if drunk or just tired. But that wasn't really anything out of the ordinary, as I do live in a building with other people, so you do hear noises even at night time. The part where it gets weird though is when I heard the footsteps end on my floor. My bedroom wall and the side of my bed where my head is located against a wall where the staircase is on the other side of it, so it was clear that the person had stopped. I don't hear any doors opening, nor any footsteps anymore, just silence. I found it kind of disturbing that someone was just standing in the hallway in the middle of the night. After a while of silence, I heard the footsteps again, but this time much more quiet and gentle, starting to walk back down the stairs. I just thought maybe someone was drunk and entered the wrong staircase or something. Not a big deal, they're gone now. I continued my YouTube marathon for a while before getting kind of sleepy. One thing I really enjoy before going to bed is looking out my window. There's one main road located at the end of the big parking lot, so sometimes I just watch cars passing by before going to sleep. So I put on my music with some quiet volume and began my staring session. During the second song, I suddenly noticed a small source of light and some movement in the down left corner of my eyes. I lowered my gaze and just froze. There was a man on the small balcony staring at me for who knows how long in my bedroom, and I was in just my t-shirt and underwear. After what felt like at least a few minutes of being frozen in shock, I quickly closed the blinds and went to check that both of my apartment doors were properly closed and locked. Luckily, they were. After a while of shivering in my bed, I came to the realization that the man staring at me was most likely the source of the footsteps. He perhaps had heard the sound of someone being awake in my apartment and listened to that for a while, Then maybe noticed the balcony and decided to check it out and noticed that you can see into the windows from there. I'm not completely sure, but I think he could have possibly seen me before I even went to look outside from the window, as I had a small light on in my room and it was relatively dark outside and I had no curtains on. If he didn't see me before though, he for sure as hell did while I was staring out the window. At that point, feeling the discomfort of being creeped on without knowing, my thought process was stopped by the sound of someone trying to open my door. Luckily my door is quite secure, so I didn't think this person could get it open. But then I heard the small letterbox being opened as slowly and quietly as possible. I still feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up while trying to explain this. I have 2 doors, thank God, so he couldn't see directly into my apartment, but I could hear him. He was breathing sort of heavy, constantly swallowing as if he was either very nervous or just somehow disturbed. I think I held my breath and changed into a motionless wax figure until he closed the letterbox and, for some reason, sprinted down the stairs, making a lot of noise again this time. I was so fixated on each sound, so I heard the sound of the hallway door being opened and I assumed that he ran out. I didn't dare look out the window to check as I was still feeling watched. Nothing more happened that night, but I was certainly not getting any sleep after that. I called up my mum and explained what happened. She had work the next day, so I didn't want to disturb her sleep more by asking her to come sleep here or pick me up. So we just agreed that we'd keep the phone line open through Viber throughout the night. I also drank 2 energy drinks. Not such a great idea when your pulse rate is already sky high. I stayed up until it was light outside and normal people were awake. I eventually fell asleep unwillingly. I didn't see the man anymore, at least up until this very moment as I'm sharing this, and I hope to never see him again. But what did happen and has made me even more paranoid is this. The next time I had work after the incident was on a Monday morning. I hadn't really been sleeping well lately and had an early morning. I was already somewhat all over the place, but this just scarred me for life. As I explained before, I have 2 doors in my apartment. Well, I was leaving for work and opened the inner one, and to my surprise, I saw the outer door slightly cracked open. I felt like throwing up and just running into my mum's arms like a little girl just to go somewhere safe, but instead I had to go to work. The rest of the day I kept looking over my shoulder, constantly having this weird feeling that someone will come to get me, like someone was watching me. I am so thankful for having 2 doors because he managed to ever so quietly open that outer door. He could have entered the apartment where I was basically passed out and done anything to me. I reported these 2 incidences to the building's management and together we filed a police report. They promised to have someone guard the premises for a while until the situation settles down. I am still sleeping at my mother's house and hoping that once I return home, I'll be safe and one day be able to get rid of this paranoia. I will not be keeping my curtains open nor checking out the window at night for a while.
Three years ago, a Reddit post titled, "I'm currently staying at a friend's house. Here's why," was shared on the popular social news website. Through a series of pictures, The user showed how he and his brother discovered something truly disturbing in their own home. They had lived in the house for around a year, and had always assumed that this bookshelf was built into the wall itself. While messing around, they discovered that that was far from the case. The bookshelf concealed a secret stairwell that spiraled downwards. The stairs themselves seemed to lead directly into a wall at the bottom. Had that been the end of it, then this would have probably been a fun little discovery. But about halfway down the stairs, the two brothers found this crawl space, barely large enough for an adult to fit in. Inside, they found this. The user added the peel of a banana he was eating for scale, showing just how small this space really was. Someone had been periodically living in their walls without them realizing, coming and going when the house was empty. Due to the house's soundproofing, it's likely that the unwanted guests slept in there at night, with the family remaining completely oblivious. These objects were found amongst the blanketing. A peculiar ornamental elephant. A key, though to what the Reddit user doesn't know. And the creepiest of all, this pair of dolls. What the intruder was doing with them remains unclear. The thought of a stranger being in your house without your knowledge is a truly unsettling one. The thought that they considered it their home as well only makes it worse. The police were contacted, and thankfully for the brothers, their house has remained intruder-free ever since. At least as far as they know. Not so much a single post for this one, but rather an entire subreddit. Internet forums are great places to meet like-minded people who want to share their knowledge and ideas regarding a certain subject. Reddit's Carl H. Programming, set up by tech whiz Carl Herald, was a community of computer science enthusiasts. Users would post about programming problems they were having, or engage in discussions about the topic, and Carl would respond with his insights. He was an extremely active and engaged moderator, who many in the community considered a friend. He would regularly Skype with members of the subreddit to teach them programming and coding, and even set up a YouTube channel to reach a wider audience and help others with their tech-related problems. His tutorials are still available to watch. Not only being a mentor to others, he also helped users who reached out to him with personal problems, offering his support during moments of depression. He was generous with his time, an amazing motivational teacher, friendly and welcoming. But for all of his qualities, Carl harbored a dark secret. In 2013, Carl was arrested for raping and torturing his 9-year-old son alongside his partner. The 33-year-old had been filming and taking pictures of the child performing sexual acts and distributed them online. His son was abused to such an extent that he ended up being admitted to a psychiatric ward after Carl's arrest. The news quickly spread to Reddit, where members of Carl H. Programming were left in disbelief, shocked that a guy who they interacted with and considered a friend could have done such a thing. In November 2014, while awaiting trial for his crime, Carl was found dead in his county jail cell. He had committed suicide by hanging himself. These days, it's a very strange subreddit to visit. There are, of course, those who are thrilled about Carl's death, since what he did was so horrible. But amongst them are confused users, who both condemn and thank Carl at the same time. He helped change the lives of many people in a positive way, but that doesn't excuse his heinous actions. The subreddit's become somewhat of a relic, since nobody leaves posts there anymore, and reading through the past conversations between Carl and the other users, which all ended so abruptly, really makes it feel like a virtual ghost town. In a post that was made over 4 years ago, one Reddit user asked the question, have you ever felt a deep, personal connection to a person you met in a dream, only to wake up feeling terrible because you realized they never existed? One user shared an experience of their own that stood out amongst all of the other responses. He recounts how back in college, he was knocked over by a football player after a confrontation. It of course pissed him off, but he got up and went on with his day. He goes on to describe his whole life from there. He gets a great job, falls in love with a girl and gets married, and the two of them have children. Then, one day, he notices something off about his lamp. One day, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. I was transfixed. I stayed up all night staring at it. He ends up staring at the lamp for days on end, becoming obsessed with it, putting a strain on his relationship with his wife. She takes the children to her parents' place, and the OP stays home, fixated on the lamp. Eventually, he has an epiphany. The lamp wasn't real. And then he woke up, in the arms of a police officer, rushing him to hospital after being knocked unconscious by the football player. What he thought had been his life from that point onwards had only been an extremely realistic hallucination after he was injured, and what he perceived as years had only been a matter of minutes. This might sound outlandish, but similar experiences have happened to people who've had near-death experiences, or even bad trips on magic mushrooms, where they live out their entire lives, only to wake up at the end of it and find it was all a hallucination. Not much scientific research has gone into this dream-life phenomenon, and those who've looked into the matter haven't come to a consensus. But some believe they're the result of large amounts of DMT being released into the brain after a person's body is put under a huge amount of stress. When this happens, a few minutes in reality can actually feel like 10, 20, 50, even 80 years. This experience caused the user to fall into a deep depression, and it's easy to see why. Perhaps the creepiest part is that the guy still catches the occasional glimpse of his son in his peripheral vision. He's perpetually 5 years old, and he can never hear what he says. When you really think about this, it's truly horrifying. Waking up in a moment you thought happened years ago, only to find everything and everyone you thought you knew and loved never really existed. It's quite a lengthy post, but you can find it, along with all of the others, down in the description below. Those of you who've watched my folklore upload might remember the Whistler video, but for everyone else, here's the backstory. Less than a year ago, a Reddit user made a post about a man who had been following him from a young age, appearing at different times throughout his life, ominously whistling at him in a particular way. One high note, and then one low. He was never able to catch a glimpse of the figure himself, but when the whistling first began, he remembers his mother's concerned, slightly terrified expression, as if she knew who was making the noise. This captured the curiosity of many Redditors, with some drawing parallels with the legend of El Silbón, an emaciated figure who stalks and eventually kills people, particularly men. Its presence is marked by an eerie, continuous whistle, and the further away it sounds, the closer to you he is. The story itself is very